What has happened since the 2007-8 financial crisis in the world? We have observed that young people, young women and young men of all groups of socioeconomic backgrounds, as well as with different levels of education, are finding very tight labor market situations, meaning that when they are out of school, out of university, depending at what level of education they are coming out and into the labor market, they are finding it very difficult to find job opportunities that match their skills and their educational background. Once they get a first job experience, they also usually have unstable job situation, a temporary contract, a partial contract that stops. So what we have seen happening is that young people have more difficult, spend a lot more time to get access to their first job, and also they don't stay long in that first job. They all the time go back to a situation of unemployment and looking for another job. So this instability, uncertainty that has affected large numbers of young people amongst countries, developed and developing countries, is a relatively new phenomenon that we are observing. And we have tried to analyze. If I sum it up in terms of figures, we now have 40% of total unemployment in the world, which is 200 million unemployed people. So a little less than 70 million are young people unemployment. The proportion of young people in unemployment is more than the proportion of the population of young people in total labor force. So they are affected more than adults and more than other age groups and more than previous decade if we compare it to the situation of youth in the labor market. Of course, there have been lots of diagnostics, and the same pattern is not seen in all the countries. So you really need a context-specific analysis of the situation. But in general, we can say that there are fewer and fewer unskilled jobs available. So those who don't have higher education find it even more difficult, while even in industrial countries as well as in developing countries, before the labor market used to offer job opportunities at different levels of qualification. This is one example. Secondly, the situation is that there is a big job crisis that is in the world affecting all groups of population. Growth is being low and slow and uncertain, so that you have a lot of fluctuations in the total employment rate. The business sector is not creating as many as they used to create job opportunities of quality. So the job crisis of young people we are talking about is both a question of quantity of jobs available, but also the quality of jobs. And when we say quality of jobs, we are talking about conditions of work, conditions of pay. So if a young person has finished tertiary education and finds in the job market only a job opportunity that is temporary, that's low pay, that doesn't take into account his or her educational background, therefore may not take the job. So it increases the unemployment and waits for a better opportunity. We've looked in various ways of explaining why MENA at the income level that many countries in the region have achieved should have such a high unemployment rate. It's the highest, it's around 30%, which is the highest in the world. More than any other developing region and more than developed country situations. All of them, as I mentioned earlier, have an issue with the job crisis for young people. MENA is confronted with a double whammy. First, there is a youth bulge, meaning the population dynamics. They are in a stage where the youth population in general, there are variations amongst countries, are at the highest level of numbers and proportion compared to the rest of the population groups, okay? So you have many more new entrants, young new entrants into the labor market. So that is on the supply side, on the population dynamic side, why the situation is more difficult, but not only in Middle East and North Africa, also Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, while other countries have passed this stage of the youth bulge and they are in a phase of gradual population aging, okay? But that doesn't explain the entire situation and this high crisis of unemployment, young unemployment. The economic policies have not been creating the types of job opportunities that absorbs in an effective way the educated or the skills available in the labor market and amongst the young people. So basically, there is a crisis of quality job opportunities. And whenever there are job opportunities that are offered, they are not taken by young people because they want better conditions and better terms and better salary. But they have also to balance aspirations with the realities of the labor market. And this gap has been widening in Middle East and North Africa in particular. First, they are investing. Let us talk about economic strategies, investment strategies in productive sectors, including in a liberal market context that we are most developing countries, most countries are operating. Open economics, but nevertheless, you strategize certain sectors where there is comparative advantage, where there is value addition, where it can create high quality job opportunities. You invest in what? You invest in research and development. When I'm saying you, it's a government, but it's also a coalition between private sector and government policies. Policies can create the enabling environment, but the enabling environment should really enable the small and the big operators to be investing and accessing and creating business opportunities and creating job opportunities of the type of high road to high productivity growth. So there is plenty of room for maneuver in terms of dynamic investment in productive sector strategies, picking those. But also, this should be complemented by a skills, training, education, catering for those sectors' needs. If you are going to invest in a certain manufacturing field, but you don't have the engineers or middle-level technicians availability, or their skills are not up to mark, you have to have a system that produces those kinds of skills, upgraded at the latest level of performance that we have seen, learning outcomes of that. So it is both intervening on the supply side, but intervening on the demand side of the labor market and making these match. And the question with the youth employment is that it's time bound. You have to enact now because the youth cohort or youth population is not going to be there with all what they can bring to growth, they can contribute to growth in a 10 years' time. Also, young people are a very heterogeneous group. So it's when we are talking about young people, the crisis is affecting more. There is a gender element on it. If we look at data on unemployment in MENA region, for example, we will find that the rate of unemployment among young women is double, sometimes 3 times more than the rate of unemployment among young men. And if you consider that women's labor force participation is lower, meaning that many less women are entering into the labor market because the opportunities are not there, because the facilities around their employment are not there. Nevertheless, they find, even if they are less in numbers, they find it more difficult to find a job, a good quality, good paying job, with all the protections that are affected. So gender lens is very important when analyzing the youth employment, and as well as coming up with the solutions, because what are the solutions that will facilitate increasing women's participation rate in the labor market? But also another group among young people that really deserves attention are those young people who are in the informal economy, sometimes with tertiary education. So you have to have support policies that help those young women and men coming out of the informal economy and transiting to the formal economy. And you have a third group of young people who are really at the risk of disadvantage, and that is low education, low skilled, because in this technological development era and globalization, the more skilled you are, the better chances you have in the labor market. The problem is that the job offers don't match the skills, but nevertheless, better ammunition. And this is a matter for public policies to how to first initial entry in the education system, but also continuously over the many different life cycles to have access to this type of training, upgrading opportunities.